Hello everyone and welcome back yet again to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. My name is Christopher Shepard. Thank you guys yet again for tuning in. Happy Wednesday all. We made it to the middle of the week and we should have a kind of intriguing show ahead for you guys. Every single segment we're looking at position groups, specifically in terms of strength of schedule. Now, you might be wondering, why is strength of schedule so important when we are talking about fantasy, especially fantasy football? Well, it's very integral to know who early on has the easier slate so that they can build momentum throughout the year when they get to the tough games. And it's also interesting to know which players might have gotten the short end of the stick. And position group by position group, we will go through and see which position might struggle in some areas and which might have some strengths. Before we get into any of that, I do want to remind you to like, follow, and subscribe to the show and the network as a whole. It is greatly appreciated by all involved. And if you do feel so inclined, please consider leaving a tip or donation at the link gsmc.cloud. That is also a huge support to both me and my fellow podcasters, and ultimately the network as a whole. You can also consider leaving tips or questions, comments, or concerns. They will be addressed and answered at the beginning of the next episode. Anything concerning the show is greatly appreciated. I would love to get your opinions on certain things. But without further ado, let us jump right into today's show. Let's start off in the world of running backs. The running back market, of course, is going to get a lot more congested as the years progress, as running backs get better and better. And so strength of schedule is going to be an interesting point to look at and discuss and debate for many years. We're talking about running backs. Which running backs are you most comfortable with taking early in fantasy football drafts to really kind of take advantage of their easier slates? So let's talk about the winners of the running backs for the 2024-25 NFL season. Let's start off with the running back who I really think can get back to his 2021 form. And he really is in a division that is going to be a slugfest, so he's going to take advantage of a lot of really tight games. And I think his touch rate is going to be very high in the early goings, and that is Jonathan Taylor. I think that Jonathan Taylor is by far going to have one of the easier slates, which is kind of funny considering that no game in the AFC South can be taken for granted. I mean, that division is perhaps going to be the most scrutinized in terms of the race for number one. The Texans are going to be there. Jacksonville, I think, is going to refine itself a little bit. And Indianapolis, with Anthony Richardson coming back from that injury, is going to look early and often to find some ways to get some early wins, and Jonathan Taylor will be a huge part of that. In the early goings, they have games against the Texans, a huge divisional game to start off, and the Packers, Bears, and the Steelers. They play the NFC North. And that's a division where you can steal a couple wins, maybe not as many as you think, because the Packers are always solid. Who knows what the Bears are going to be? And the Lions might just be the best team in the NFC, the most well-rounded team. And so, in the early goings, Jonathan Taylor really might get a huge share of the workload depending on how Anthony Richardson progresses, because this is his first full season under center for the Indianapolis Colts, and how he adjusts to different defenses will largely depend on if Jonathan Taylor's doing well. So from the word jump, Jonathan Taylor is someone who I think a lot of fantasy football managers should and can rely on in the early going, because they're going to be facing some very tough games in the early goings. But that being said, it's an easy schedule for Jonathan Taylor himself. It's not an easy schedule for the entire team. It's nothing like that. When you really meet it out for all position groups and break it down to the running back position, Jonathan Taylor has an easy slate, and the easiest out of any of these running backs. And then we're going to go to a running back situation that's more by committee. In the Los Angeles Chargers, and especially Gus Edwards, I think that he will be someone heavily scrutinized. He's the fourth easiest schedule, and I really think the Chargers are going to become predicated on running the football. That will really work out for Gus Edwards. They start off the Panthers, the Steelers, the Cardinals, and Saints, weeks 5 through 6. Those are big games where you expect Gus Edwards to get a lot of touches. And what I like most about running back by committee approaches is that the first guy is always going to be the most versatile. You know what I mean? We saw it when he was with the Ravens. Gus Edwards was perhaps the most versatile. He got the chunk yardage. He really helped in the receiving game. And I really think he's going to translate well to the Chargers' philosophies. Jim Harbaugh is really going to appreciate a running back like Gus Edwards and utilize him a lot more than people expect. Now, the problem with that might be that he's not going to get as many touches as, say, a Jonathan Taylor, but I still think all of his touches are going to be valuable touches. There are touches there that are not going to be taken for granted. I think that Gus Edwards will make the most of them. And ultimately, I think that it will pay off in terms of him being a solid fantasy running back, at least for the first couple of weeks of the season. Then we move to one of my favorite running backs. He's on my favorite team in K9, Kenneth Walker. I think that a lot of people underestimate Kenneth Walker as a fantasy running back, but there's some interesting stats to know about a guy of Kenneth Walker's caliber. He has a top 5 projected schedule. He plays the NFC and AFC East mostly, so you can see that there could be some wins. You can pick some up against, say, the Giants and Commanders. You'll be in struggles with the Eagles and Cowboys, and so on and so forth. But in the AFC East, I think they can steal a couple games. It's going to be tough, but Kenneth Walker's going to get a lot of touches in those games. I really think he's going to be a pivotal part of this offense because I feel like a lot of attention is going to be focused on Geno and his receiving core, and not a lot of attention is going to be brought to a guy like Kenneth Walker, but he's still an asset for the Seattle Seahawks. And I think he's going to be utilized in many different ways. He perhaps has some of the most explosive traits of any Seattle Seahawks running back since that man Marshawn Lynch. And so they really need to use that to the best of their abilities. So I think he's going to get fewer touches. I still believe that, like Gus Edwards, because he's also a true RB1, they're going to be much more valuable. And the RB2 behind him is definitely more of a situational kind of running back. Zach Charbonnet is more of a power back. And Kenneth Walker is kind of the more versatile, kind of makes the extra cut back. And so, in this schedule, I think he will be very successful. And one thing to note is that in 10 games last year, he had 15 touches and 16 PPR points in those games. And so, while there certainly are more experienced running backs and guys who might have more appealing schedules in your eyes, to the naked eye, Kenneth Walker is one of these running backs you can't necessarily overlook. He might go a little bit later than you would like, but he's still going to be there. Maybe you see him as a streaming option. Maybe you see him as a flex option. But I still think he, if drafted, is going to be an asset for any team. Now, last but not least, let's see a guy who's in a new home for this upcoming season. A guy who also, much like Jonathan Taylor, needs to regain his footing in the league, wants to find himself on a new team, and that is Josh Jacobs. Moves from Las Vegas to Green Bay, and now I believe that he's going to be a running back who a lot of people are going to hinge on really solidifying this team. I think that being perhaps the most experienced player on this offense also helps in that regard. And I believe that Josh Jacobs still has a little bit of extra juice to him. I think that in the Las Vegas Raiders offense, he kind of ran stagnant because the Las Vegas Raiders offense was stagnant to some degree. And so, on a young, hungry, scrappy team, I think that Josh Jacobs' traits will be shown even more. I think that Jordan Love needs a backfield partner that he can rely upon, who has been in this league and who's looking himself to grow beyond what he was in Las Vegas. And I think that's going to have a positive impact on how people view him. They play in the early goings the Eagles, Colts, and Rams. And then from week 5 on, they play the AFC South. Should be a couple easy wins, but this is a highly competitive schedule for the Packers because of the fact that they were a second-place team last year. They got a second-place schedule. And so, it's the 6th easiest schedule, but if he navigates the tough start, I really think Josh Jacobs can get going. I think that all of the Packers' hopes hinge upon them being able to beat the teams in and around them. And I think that Josh Jacobs, playing in a tough division in the ASC, really knows a thing or two about playing and diagnosing the weaknesses in tough teams. But now, overall, looking at these 4 running backs, these are not high-end guys. Maybe Jonathan Taylor was a couple of years ago, but these are not guys who are world beaters. They're not McCaffreys. They're not Halls. They're not even Mosterts or Achans, who I've kind of talked a little bit about in a negative light. But these are guys who can get the job done in certain situational moments, are on teams that, more than anything, should preach the run game a little bit more. Don't necessarily know about Kenneth Walker, though, because who knows with the Seattle offense, because they have new coaching implemented. But all 4 guys who should be in run-friendly schemes and now have the schedules to back up their style of play. And so overall, you can choose these guys if you want, but at the end of the day, you're going to have to wait and see with these guys. They're not really set in stone as guys I would immediately grab. They are nice streaming and flex options, we can say. That will just about do it for this segment. Coming next, we look at the losers of the running back schedule. Which of the guys on this list got the short end of the stick? We'll be back to discuss them on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.